One Piece's final war has officially just started. If you're a One Piece fan and you're even remotely close to catching up on the manga, you know there is this gigantic final war that we've been waiting for years, foreshadowed even before Marineford, that's supposed to be the pinnacle of the entire series. And of course, after Wano, Oda told us we were heading to the final saga, so this final war's sort of been creeping up on our agenda ever so slightly. But as of One Piece chapter 1146, I think it is safe to say that this final war has officially started in the Elbaf arc. That's right, chapter 1146 actually kickstarted the final war we've all been waiting for, and in this video, I'm going to explain how Oda's been using Elbaf to sort of kickstart this war we've all been waiting for, and none of us expected it. I seriously think the actual fights in the final war could be as soon as the next arc in the story, so if you want to stay updated on One Piece and how close we're getting to those matchups, make sure to like and subscribe. Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit before we explain how Oda has used Elbaf to sort of kickstart this final war that we've all been waiting for. Of course, One Piece fans have known that a final war was coming into the series, probably as early as Whitebeard saying someone finding the One Piece will kickstart the world's greatest war, but even before that, even since Skypiea, we've known that there was a giant war that happened 800 years ago, and of course, One Piece would end with a war similar to that scale, so we've been waiting for a very long time. The first inkling of this war's start started in the Reverie arc when one of the Gorosei members says it's time for the Great Cleansing, which was sort of the first time we realized the world might get reset, the world government is starting to realize things are descending into chaos, and there needs to be order reestablished. And the tipper for the world government for them to realize, okay, we really need to start preparing for a giant war, was the last arc of the story, Egghead Island, where Vegapunk reveals to the entire world that the world is going to sink. He doesn't explicitly say it's because of the actions of the world government, but the world government themselves obviously knows that they are responsible for that, so it's time for them to start gearing up and prepare for this rebellion that's about to happen. And that was sort of the point of the Egghead Island arc. Obviously, there was a lot of other things established in this arc, but it was sort of a spark to ignite the final war's start, to get the world government to realize, okay, it's time for us to erase the world, the people have found out too much, and this was all Vegapunk's fault. And this all drastically ties into some of the dialogue that Gunko has in this chapter. Before we get to this chapter specifically, I want to talk about how Oda has been secretly using Elbaf to kickstart this final war ever since the Straw Hats got to the island, without us really noticing. In Egghead Island, we realized that the Gorosei were majorly strong fighters and that the Seraphim can really hold their own, and I think this was Oda telling us that the world government has some hard hitters that the Straw Hats will have to face in the final war. However, in Elbaf, something in a recent chapter that really stuck with me was Luffy's reaction to hearing world government warriors, as if he didn't realize the opponents that would stand in the way of the One Piece were not other pirates, but the world government. That's exactly where I started to realize Elbaf is actually a stepping stone for us to get to the final war. Yes, Oda including the Gods Knights in this arc specifically could be him doing exactly what he was doing in Egghead Island, sort of just establishing more world government forces that will have to fight in the final war, but I actually think there's a little bit of a deeper level to this, where this is the first time Luffy has realized it's not just a cakewalk versus pirates to the One Piece, there is the literal forces of the structure of the world aiming to stop him, and that's why he has a sort of questionable reaction to world government warriors. Another thing that Elbaf has been setting up the final war with is Loki. Originally, my bet was on Loki being an arc-centric character, someone like a Vivi or a Rebecca, but now that we know Loki has a very interesting relationship with Rox, and we have not got the Rox flashback yet, I really think Loki's going to be a vehicle to share with the readers what Rox was really like, and how the God Valley incident really happened. And of course, since the God Valley incident has been withheld from us for such a long time, and the God Valley Island no longer exists in the One Piece world, just like the Lugia Kingdom, I really do believe the God Valley flashback will have incredible tie-ins to the world government and the final war, which is something we're probably going to get in Elbaf. Next, the chapter that absolutely blew up in Elbaf, the mural that Frankie found. This is a direct correlation to the final war because it tells the history of the previous wars that the world government had, first against Joy Boy's civilization, and before that against a civilization we've never even heard of. The inclusion of these events in Elbaf, sure, it makes sense because Elbaf is such an old nation, but these are deliberately placed in this arc specifically because we're starting to get teases about why the world government is evil, why the final war is about to happen, and what happened in the past, all things that will be incredibly important for this elusive final war. And lastly, just looking at the dialogue, Scopper Gaban himself says, "It really is the end of the world," meaning that the top echelon of characters who know about the history of the world already are awaiting this giant war, and for it to encompass the entire globe, it is going to happen sooner than we think. And lastly, let's talk about chapter 1146 specifically. I think this really was the individual chapter to kick off the war we've been waiting for, and it is plain as day when you look at Gunko's dialogue in this chapter specifically. First off, her dialogue about the world being supposed to have disappeared quietly ties back in exactly to what I was talking about with Vegapunk and the world sinking. The world really was just supposed to sink after Emu took power from Joy Boy without anybody noticing. There was supposed to be a complete reset and a great cleansing, the one we've been hearing about since the Reverie. But now again, as Gunko is saying, because certain characters in the One Piece world knew too much, like Vegapunk and the citizens of Ohara, and now there's people like Luffy standing up to the world government, it no longer can go out quietly. The world will be encompassed in a giant war, and it is going to happen incredibly soon. This also sort of addresses the one criticism I had about Elbaf, which is, why are the God's Knights of all times choosing now to kidnap these giant children, even though these Straw Hats are on Elbaf at the same time? Well, it's because after Vegapunk alerted the entire world that the world is sinking, the world government needed to take action immediately to secure Elbaf for the final war, because like Gunko said, whoever controls Elbaf has a huge advantage for the final war. Another really interesting thing is that Brook had heard of the God's Knights before, which I think is another indicator of the war starting very soon. When certain Straw Hats who don't exactly have a lot of relevance in the story as of lately start to drop dialogue like this, I think it really is an indicator that setups for certain characters and certain information is about to happen in the story. Again, for the millionth time this video, I think this really does indicate that the final war is coming, and this is just one of many plot threads being established for that giant conclusion of One Piece. And lastly, just look at this panel. I think this is such a grand way to start the final war. Even though it technically hasn't started yet, I think the chaos and the giants and the nightmare beasts in this panel really just exemplify what the final war is going to be. A giant, pun intended, war that is absolutely chaotic, engulfing the entire planet in its flames, and that is exactly why Oda used this panel specifically with this line of dialogue. So, I know we talk about One Piece going on forever, and maybe it will go on forever, but I actually think that final penultimate climax we've all been waiting for is right on the horizon, as opposed to maybe a lot of people thinking the One Piece will come first. I am personally now of the opinion that we will be launching directly into the conflict of the final war right after Elbaf, or maybe even during Elbaf. So if you want to stay up to date with Elbaf's chapters, and also are interested in what I have to say with each weekly chapter dropping, make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.